one of the things I think that is a bit of a misnomer or a false expectation. Let's kind of address two or three of those things to begin with, if that's okay, Matt Smith. And you're just projecting me out on the iPad.
I am.
You got the big screen back there. You couldn't get the projector to work.
No.
Okay. Okay. Well.
I'd have to have the projector to be able to do that.
It didn't make it to Canada.
No, it didn't.
I got you. I got you. I guess all those investments in technology were worth it. But anyway, so let's
Coming through nice and big and bright though. It's like
yeah, on the iPad Air or whatever the hell that is. Okay. Well, let's start with this for a few minutes here. Let's talk about what some misperceptions are that people tend to have running schools. And let's start number one with the U.S. Canadian thing. I don't know. I mean, we work with a ton of schools all over Canada, whether it's on that side of the country or whether it's British Columbia on the other end or anywhere in between. Not that there's a lot of people in between, but what happens is I get the question constantly is, well, okay, so this stuff works in the U.S., but what about Canada, or what's the difference between U.S. and Canada and one thing or another? And I got to tell you, mostly it has to do with there's a little bit difference in regulation when it comes to mailing lists and privacy with kids and so forth. And historically, from a marketing standpoint, Canada has been more wild, wild west than the U.S. as we've been more aggressively ahead of you guys on shutting down the ability of people to market to the general public. Although you've recently caught up and gone a little crazy with it. So, but other than that, is from a standpoint of the way that the students think about what you're doing, the way the pricing works, and so forth, there really is very little difference. And if you look at North America as a whole, there's way more differences between Toronto and British Columbia than there is between Toronto and Washington, D.C. or New York. And there's way more differences between you guys and the French Canadians than there is anything else, right? So what you have is everything that we're talking about here has worked phenomenally well in schools across Canada. In fact, we have schools in Germany and Australia, New Zealand, bless you, Bob, in the UK. We've worked with schools in the Middle East and Israel and in Bahrain and one place or another, and all the same principles have worked fine. Are there regional differences? Sure, there's a little bit of difference between Denver and between Washington, D.C., and there's a little bit of difference between Denver and Toronto and environments. But I think, Rob, you could probably attest, what people have a tendency to do is say, that won't work in my area because, and everything that comes after the because is other totally unmitigated bullshit that is a personal excuse for not being successful, right? So if you ever say that, that means that you're just anchoring yourself in to stay where you're at rather than opening your mind to move forward. Is that a fair thing to say, Rob, having been around a while?
Yes.
Okay. Because somehow, you're in Niagara Falls. A lot of people will say, oh, well, that would work in Niagara Falls, U.S. It won't work in Niagara Falls, Canada, just as a way of making an excuse for implementing. So that's the first thing to get out of your head is certainly there are regional differences. The way that I present something in Bahrain will probably be a little different than the way I present it in Germany, which will probably be a little different than the way I might present it in Toronto versus in Denver. But those are really minor changes. Human psychology is human psychology. We have to adapt to the regulatory environment from time to time. And again, until recently, yours was easier to cope with than ours in the U.S. And most recently, there's been some changes that make some of that a little bit more difficult. than it was, but still manageable. So that's one thing. Rob, anything to add to that, or Master Smith, anything to add to that before I go? I'm on the rest of my litany to get us started here.
No, and Rob did, because had maybe Rob not been here and been from Canada, and he's charging the 197 and 300 for black belt. So at least for 6 years, and they are signing up for 6 years. So at least they understand those price points will work. It's just a matter of.
Well, and Master Smith, you are violating our principle number one. That's where I was going to go next anyway, is we basically have a behind the scenes principle of not discussing pricing with people before they are actually enrolled in our program on an ongoing basis and have been around for a while.
That's Rob's fault.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the reason for that is, for some reason, pricing is a very emotional issue for martial artists. And I think money in general tends to be, there's I don't know whether it's wounds or if there's, some kind of misperception about what it is when you run a business, or somehow the fact that you're a teacher is different. I don't know what it is, but martial artists tend to want to be starving artists for some reason. And one of my favorite quotes is by Paul McCartney, which, I mean, if there's ever been a successful artist, I would say that, the Beatles certainly qualify. And Paul McCartney's quote was, everybody thought that we were anti-materialistic. He said, nothing could be further from the truth. He said, John Lennon, anchor in how people think about John Lennon. John Lennon and I would sit down and say, hey, let's write ourselves a swimming pool. The way that the most successful songwriting team in history thought about their art was, in part at least, in the way that it was going to create financial remuneration back to them. And again, John Lennon is an interesting case because people have him, pegged as like the leader of the hippie movement and anti-materialistic. And he had a huge white Rolls Royce that was painted by famous artist Peter Max, that he drove around London. And then when he lived in New York, he and Yoko took over the top floor of the Dakota, which is one of the most expensive residential buildings in the world. So martial artists, just like, and I like to use music because I spent a little bit of time in high school managing a rock band. And they used to say to me they didn't want to be commercial. And I said, so you want to be broke? They said, no, we don't want to be broke. We just don't want to be commercial. I said, all commercial means is somebody's willing to give you money for what you're doing, right? So if you're non-commercial, it means they don't want to listen to your music. And if you are commercial, it means that people do want to listen to your music. And as martial artists, we're the same way. You've got to get rid of all of the emotional baggage that floats around our industry. And number two is you've got to get your emotional part of the way your tuition and your pricing and your structure should be done, and recognize that your mission here with program structure, your mission here with the tuition levels, your tuition is to create the best long-term experience for your student, to have a positive ripple effect through the community, and to provide enough financial resources so your staff can be as well, if not better, compensated than their other career opportunities, and so that you have the resources available to provide the tools and the resources that your students require in order to really get as good as they can possibly be. That what happens in our industry is people think somehow that there's a negative correlation. In other words, the more quote unquote professional or commercial you are, the lower quality your standards and the lower quality your students. The reality is it's the opposite. Is the guys who resist appropriate pricing, who resist appropriate structure, and the ones who are frankly broke tend to have the lowest quality students, and they tend to have the students who drop out the quickest. And what you have sometimes around the industry, Master Smith and myself, and probably me more than him, because I never quite pursued the kickboxing that I had intended to in my youth. But what we get sometimes is we get people who have a negative perception of us because somehow they think that what we're doing is watering down martial arts or that we're teaching lower quality curriculum. But it's the opposite. It's the absolute opposite. What the hardcore traditionalists tend to have is they tend to have their average student only last 6 to 9 months. And if you've been in business for 20 years and on average everybody dropped out at gold belt or green belt, what that means is almost every person you've ever talked to is horrible at martial arts, was always horrible at martial arts, and never had the capacity to get good. Would everybody agree with that? I mean, the only way that any of us is going to create a quality martial artist is for there to be there 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, or even better, to create a lifestyle of what they do. So all of the hardcore traditionalists around you who suddenly look down on you because you're teaching professionally or you're making a living, your response to them is everybody you've ever talked to, everybody you've ever touched sucks. Because that's the reality. And I know all of those guys, no matter how hardcore, they've all produced 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, high quality competitors or high quality black belts. But the reality is what they've also created is hundreds of people who are the guy that you run into at Starbucks or Tim Hortons you have your martial arts outfit on or your jacket or your shirt, and they say, oh, I used to do karate. Well, great. How far did you get? That's always my question. I got to gold belt. What goes on in your mind? Oh, well, you dropped out. You didn't know very much when you dropped out. You don't know anything now. What was the point of that? Am I wrong? I mean, that's always my reaction to that, right? So you've got to get out of your mind, number one, that there's a massive difference between the way that somebody in Toronto or Washington, D.C. or Denver is going to think about this, because human nature is human nature across the board. Plus, we've worked with many, 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 many schools that have been very successful all across Canada. Number two, you've got to get out of your mind all the wounds and the history and the expectations about wanting to be a starving artist, because starving artists tend not to be very high quality artists, and number two is they tend not to be in business for very long. Or the other part of that, by the way, I want to point out is all the hardcore traditionalists who are against making money. What they're really arguing for is to be amateurs forever rather than be professionals. Think about that for a second. All the ones who are arguing against teaching, charging a reasonable tuition level, making a good income, really what they're arguing for is to be the guy who's asking if you want fries with that at the McDonald's drive-thru while they go in and pretend to be a quality instructor for 10 hours a week, right? I mean, that's what they're arguing for. And I don't mean to be insulting. Maybe they're an attorney during the day. But if you're an attorney for 60 hours a week and you're a martial artist for 10 hours a week, you're never going to be as good as I am, as Master Smith is, because we have now spent, in my case, since 1980, doing nothing but martial arts 100% of the time. And I don't mean physically training 100% of the time, although Master Smith there is training like he has a world title fight when he turned 70. When he was fighting professionally, you were training, 40 hours a week, Master Smith, and now you only train 20? So, but if you're a professional, what that means is you have your entire professional career, whether that's 40 or 50 or 60 hours in a week, or whether that's all of the longevity of your career, doing only martial arts, your own physical skill set, your own technical development, learning how to be a better master teacher, learning how to be a better school owner and operator, learning how to be better at customer service, and ultimately learning how to share the message more profoundly and more broadly through the community. Is that a fair way to say it?
I think so.
And Rob, I'll put you back on the spot. Do you see an awful lot of us teaching people how to water things down? you've been to our black belt retreat up in Breckenridge before. Is that an easy black belt test where we just letting everybody buy their belts?
I haven't been yet.
Oh, you haven't been there. Okay.
But I have a lot of footage of it. I've been following it, and no, there's nothing. And I saw Grandmaster Smith's school I was out there to see a lot of his students, and no, my chief instructor was there as well. We got a lot of good ideas from it, not only on a business point, but basically how to keep all of our students in good shape. Since we made a meeting at Sterling, actually, we've had a lot of our classes improve discipline-wise, and all the quality has gone up for sure.
Yeah. So so those are some of the myths that permeate, right? Is people think, well, I don't want to sell out, or I don't want to just become all about selling and marketing. And somehow they also think that as they raise the prices, that somehow that's incongruent with teaching a broad number of people quality martial arts. But actually it works the opposite. As you rejigger your program structure, and as you improve the pricing position that you're in, what happens is, number one, you position yourself, if they ever compare you with anybody else, which is rare, but if they do, you position yourself as the highest quality school in your area. You position yourself as the highest quality instruction. We're in a business, and there's a lot of these, but we're in a business where people don't want the cheapest instruction. They want the best. They want the best martial arts instructor. They don't want the cheapest. If you're the cheapest, or if you're, near the cheapest, or if you're not, frankly, the most expensive, they assume you're not the highest quality. I mean, that's just the way the psychology internationally works, is people tend to, absent other objective criteria. I stole this from Robert Cialdini, who wrote a book called Influence, Science, and Practice. Absent an other objective criteria, price determines perception of value. Now, everybody get that. Is if they walk in and the tuition that you quote them is more than they expected, what happens is not that they say, oh, they're greedy. That's not the way they react. The way they react is, oh, these guys must be really good. What's the second point of decision they go through? Can I fit this in my budget or not? Right? So it's not, what are they charging relative to the guy down the street? What's going through their mind is, I want the highest quality instructor. This must be them. Oh, can I figure out how to afford it? Does that make sense? Master Smith, anything to add to that before I accused you of being long-winded, but I can get there as well.
No, I think you were good, and I did talk to them already about the black belt test in Colorado, so they understand how that works.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's just an additional misperception, because I know that in the room we have some people who think of themselves as MMA schools and some people who think of themselves as traditional schools. There is a misperception that those are two completely separate and different businesses. And if what happens is, and again, Master Smith and I have the benefit, or the the gray hairs, whatever it might be. We've been in the industry for an awful long time, and really the target audience of most MMA schools today is what our target audience was for our schools in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So it really, even that isn't any different. And so when we talk about program structure, pricing, when we talk about it being developmental as opposed to just physical, when we talk about it being personal development as opposed to just athletic, that's absolutely just as valid, even more important to anchor in for a adult male only oriented hardcore MMA school as it is for a school that's targeting 7-year-old boys and girls, right? So get out of your mind that somehow as an MMA school you're in the fitness business, or you're in the fighting business, and that in the kids program that you're in like personal development. I mean, that's not true at all. What is true is that we're all predominantly in the personal development business that's based on an athletic activity that certainly is going to create some competency in self-defense if and only if they ever need that, which is rare, right? Is, you know, some of us focus so much on teaching them how to fight, is we fail to recognize that they need to be more confident every day, and they need to be able to fight maybe once in a lifetime, you know, maybe once every few years at the most, right? So, you know, we've got to focus on what the best and highest value proposition is. And a way I say it as well, which again doesn't endear me to most broke martial artists, but when you're putting a price tag on it, if I'm a parent and you're telling me my child is going to learn how to do a front kick, a side kick, roll around the ground and choke somebody, is I have a price tag I put on that, right? Now, what's the price tag? Well, it's not very high. What's the value of my child learning to do a front kick or a front punch? I don't know, $7,500 a month. It's a recreational activity. I'm not going to put a very high value on that. However, if you tell me my child is going to be immune to negative peer pressure, is going to be confident in all situations, and is going to rise to the top of his or her class in school, and is going to go on to quality university or go on to high-level success in their career, now you're talking about something that's priceless. Does that make sense? And with an adult, it's really the same thing. Is if I'm an adult male who comes in to train in MMA, let's say I'm 30 years old, well, my desire to learn how to be a hardcore fighter dissipates pretty quickly. However, if I'm an attorney or a doctor or any level of professional, and you have the picture in my mind that this now creates unshakable confidence in my career, and it makes me immune to bullying in the workplace in addition to physically, and this is going to give me great confidence in all my relationships, and it's going to help me really learn everything that I need to learn more quickly, and it's going to help me be successful in my physical health, my mental health, my emotional focus and capability, as well as if I ever need to defend myself, if I'm ever in a physical confrontation, be able to handle it. Well, now you're talking about something that's priceless as opposed to something that has kind of a limited shelf life and a limited price point that it's worthwhile. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's very important to shift your thinking from what you think that it is that we do to what the high value is to the student, and for a child what the high value is to the student as well as for the parent. So as we move into those higher levels and into that higher level of value, what it does is, guess what? It helps us keep them longer. If we keep them longer, they get more physically gifted. They learn more technique. They anchor it in, and they therefore learn how to really have it become permanent as opposed to temporary. But as we keep them longer, from a business standpoint, and this is where it's a win-win, as we keep them longer, the lifetime value of a student skyrockets, right? So I was talking to a school owner yesterday, and they were telling me their instruction's great, their curriculum is great, their retention is great. And I went through the computation and figured out that the lifetime value of a new person when they enroll is going to be worth to their facility $400. Lifetime value. Okay. Now, what that means is, and it's probably the most extreme I've encountered recently, but the other misconception is among schools that we talk to is they all say exactly this. And when I say all, I'm exaggerating, but it is certainly most. They say, I have a great curriculum. My instructors are very charismatic. I've got a great floor. My lineage, let me tell you who I trained with and where I came from. Our students are great. If you could only teach me how to be better at marketing so I could get 10 more a month, or if I could get 20 more a month, or if I could get 5 more a month, everything would be fine, because you don't understand. We're already charging more than anybody else in our area. We're already charging as much as we can in our area. We have great instructors. They're very talented. Our students love us. We can't do any better on that. You just need to teach us how to be better at marketing, and everything will be great. Everybody says that, right? Probably. I mean, I hate to venture a guess, but some of you came to the seminar today thinking, oh, these guys are great marketing people. I'm great at teaching. My students are love us. We keep them as long as is humanly possible. I mean, there's nothing you can do to improve that. And by the way, we're already charging more than anybody else in the area. We couldn't possibly do anything more with that. If we could just learn how to be better on Facebook and on Google, we would be better off. Did anybody have that perception coming in? You could admit it. No? Okay. They're not going to admit it, Master Smith.
In this group.
No. I have spoken to groups of like 200 people where I can say, who in here freely admits that you suck at marketing, and pretty much everybody will raise their hand. And then I'll say, who thinks you are great instructors and have great retention? They'll all raise their hand. Then I'll say, who in here is losing less than 2% of your student body a month, and nobody will raise their hand. And then I'll say, okay, everybody raise their hand. So you all suck on retention because you're losing 7% a month, and that's the definition of not being particularly good at it. Does that make sense to everybody? So let me clarify terms. If I have 500 active students, we can typically get that to be where you're losing between 5 and 10 a month. So that means you only need 10 new students a month or less to stay even. Okay? And the school I mentioned that I talked to yesterday, they have 300 active students between 2 locations, and they're enrolling 60 new people a month, and felt that their biggest need was for more consistent and effective marketing strategies. Right? So the definition of having good student retention is we look at a few factors. One is, what's the graduation rate to black belt? And I used to, when we did this series of seminars before a few years ago, I used to use the example of Harvard. And I would talk about Harvard having a 92% graduation rate of people who were admitted. 92% graduate to their bachelor's degree in 4 years. And I was noticing people's eyes gloss over because they're thinking, well, that's Harvard, that's not us, we can't do it. And so I shifted my example to the worst public school system in the United States, probably in North America. I don't know how it compares to Canadian, but the worst public school system in the United States, I would ask everybody, who thinks you have a higher graduation rate to black belt than the worst public school system in the United States has graduating from high school? Who thinks that? Well, everybody thought that. The reality is nobody in the room, which at the time the example was based on Detroit public schools. At the time it was Washington, D.C. was the second worst in the United States. Detroit was the second worst. Was the worst. At the time, Detroit's graduation rate for high school was somewhat less than 50%. It was, I believe, it was 45%. And think about it for a second. The question is do you graduate 45 or 50% of everybody who enrolls to black belt in 4 years? Well, I mean, that's not a very high benchmark to be better at graduating people to black belt than the Detroit public school system at its worst was in graduating kids with mostly a very impoverished background, with very impoverished family situations, to their high school diploma. Does that make sense to everybody if you think about it that way? So anyway, after that rant, what I would say is what we want to always focus on with schools is looking at the lifetime value, which is only a function of program structure combined with student retention, and make sure that that's in really good shape, and then give them all the marketing tools and techniques and strategies they need to enroll as many new students as they need to get up to their target number. And a lot of people think, well, it's just the more the merrier, and that's not necessarily true. We'll see schools that their target once they get going is maybe at an individual school to be at 300 active students, grossing $1 million a year, netting $500,000 a year. Well, that might be their target prime. So what we've got to do is we've got to teach them how to get enough people in to get to that point. But your active count is only going to ever be a function of two things: how many new people you get and how long you keep them, right? So what most people are doing is if they enroll 10 students a month, they also lost 10 students a month. So therefore, they're on the definition of a plateau. Does that make sense to everybody? So, but let's talk about what the functions of retention are real quickly, because again, it's my next point of where I think people get this wrong is if you look around. I mean, in our industry, Bob Dunn here, myself, Master Smith, we've been around a while. And what I have noticed, and the internet has perpetuated this in all areas, but there's what I have not too charitably described as the bozo explosion of consultants running around. And so what you have now is you have everybody and their brother pretending to be an expert on how to do this, right? And most of them have never run a particularly successful school. An awful lot of them, perhaps I worked with or Master Smith worked with, and an awful lot of them we're responsible for having birthed them. But what they've had is they've had some success in a limited time period or some success in one or two things, and then decided to put a consultant's hat on, thinking they can make money of that, and they run around trying to teach everybody how to do it. But I'll tell you what the most pervasive thing is the most pervasive thing is selling martial arts teachers what martial arts teachers want, finding something to sell to broke or not terribly financially successful martial arts teachers that addresses their athletic enthusiasms as opposed to what they really need. And what I mean by that is there's a tremendous number of people around that are running around teaching some version of curriculum, right? You have Hyper and you have XMA or a couple of those type of things. But more pervasively, you have the mythology that by developing a more charismatic instructor with faster paced and better floor systems, combined with adding some piece of curriculum, you're going to keep students longer. Did everybody hear what I'm saying? There's two factors that are directly correlated with student retention. There's a bunch of other factors that have no correlation whatsoever, although in some cases they're not, they're nice to have, but they're not directly correlated with retention. What's not correlated with retention is how interesting your curriculum is. The other thing that's not correlated with retention is how much cool stuff you've learned and how often you've traveled to Brazil or Korea or China to learn some new thing. The other thing that's not correlated with retention is the athletic talent of the instructor, nor correlated with retention is the level of podium skills, speaking skills, or charisma of the instructor. Everybody follow that? So having an exciting, charismatic, talented instructor who has all kinds of cool techniques to teach, who is incredible at doing it, has nothing to do with retention. Okay? Doesn't hurt. It's nice to have that. What's directly correlated with retention and is essential for retention is two things. Number one, this is a biggie. It's relationship. is it's getting the student to truly and completely feel comfortable with you, to be comfortable with the staff, to like and to be comfortable with the other students, and to get started smoothly and be excited rather than apprehensive to come to your school every time. Does that make sense? What most of us do is the opposite. We're so happy to get them to give us money that we throw them over the wall into an exciting, charismatic, fast-paced class with somebody who's an egocentric, charismatic athlete who doesn't know their name, who doesn't care about them as an individual. And then we wonder about why they drop out, because we're so happy with how capable the instructor is and how long our resume is. Does that make sense to everybody? So the first thing, which is directly correlated, I can show you the schools that have the absolute best retention are the ones that are absolutely best at being nice, at being good human beings, at building a relationship, at building rapport, and at making people feel comfortable. In some cases, they have the most boring curriculum I've ever seen, but they're really good at being the place that lights up the person's life, that they are just so happy to be there, right? So that's number one. Number one is relationship. It's about really learning quality people skills, having a sincere and empathetic teacher who knows them, knows their needs, knows what their interests are, knows what their fears and hesitations are, and gets them started smoothly while introducing them to a bunch of other nice people who are happy to see them there, who are going to be helpful, supportive, and cooperatively, and disappointed if they don't show up for class. Does that make sense? The number two directly correlated, scientifically demonstrated, provable correlation to student retention is goals. It's them having a goal beyond, in the child's case, something to do between soccer season and hockey season. Although I guess with you guys, hockey is like, 12 months a year. But it's something to do between soccer and hockey or between soccer and baseball, right? Would you agree that a lot of the parents bring their kids in looking for some activity while they have a spare spot to plug it in? So for a child, it's getting the parents' mindset shifted to there's elementary school or middle school. There's the martial arts school, which is an ongoing activity that teaches discipline, focus, character development, and other capabilities, as well as obviously athletic talent and health and so forth. Then there's other seasonal and recreational sports activities, and you're not in that category, right? For an adult, it's getting them to go from, adult female student often comes in with I want to lose the last 10 pounds of baby weight before my sister's wedding, or some comparable short-term goal in their mind, right? Oftentimes, a male might come in with some kind of fitness goal that's maybe not articulated that way, but it's like that. I finally figured out that, I can't tighten the belt, so I need to get another 2 inches off so my clothes fit again, or I have some short-term, perceived desire to learn some physical techniques. But if you don't shift it to thinking in terms of this is a permanent lifestyle choice, at the very least, this is my objective to get to black belt in 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years, that I have a long-term goal. If you don't shift it from a short-term thing to a long-term thing, then your dropout rate tends to be problematic. It's also why we pick on the 60-day, the commitment is only 2 months at a time, right? And I know when you have the 60-day option to cancel, that's not the way you think about it, but it's the way they think about it, right? Is the way you can set them up to think about it is I'm only making a decision whether I'm coming for the next 2 months or not. Doesn't matter what any other conversation. what we're working on always doing is teaching them how to think about black belt and beyond, and about this is a lifestyle, and this is something they're going to do from now on, rather than it's something they're going to do for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months. Does that make sense to everybody? So really, the correlation for student retention, and by the way, the correlation for whether a student gets really good or is forever horrible is only whether they train for 4 or 5 years, because even the worst instructor, if they have them for 5 years, will create a much better student than the best instructor who drops them out in 4 months. Would everybody agree with that? I mean, it's not a very big leap to say, you know, I can have the best gold belt that was ever created in the history, and if they drop out at gold belt, they're not going to be very good a year from now, right? I mean, they go like this and they go like this. So what we're always focusing on doing is how to build that relationship so they feel truly comfortable with us, truly comfortable in the school. Then we're building the long-term thinking, objectives, and goals. And I'm not talking about contracts. What I'm talking about is their worldview of how they think about this long-term. Is that making sense so far? Matt Smith, before we take a break, and I don't want to monopolize the whole day, but any questions on this? Is this making sense to everybody? Matt Smith, is this on target with what you guys have already accomplished today so far? Usually we're pretty in sync with that.
Yeah, that was that retention was on the list. So
yeah.
You one of the topics.
Well, good.
Pretty good at that probably.
Well, how about if we do this? How about if I maybe monopolize another 30 minutes or so, if that's okay with everybody? And since I am the marketing guy, we could talk about marketing a little bit here, because that is an important component. And then Master Smith, that'll be what, about, give my time, that'll be about 1:30, so you'll have another 90 minutes or so before you guys are done for the day?
Fine.
And you've got the scheduling fine, so we can schedule times for us to all follow up early next week?
We can do that now if you'd like.
Well, why don't we wait till I'm done on this, if you don't mind.
Okay.
We can maybe do that in about 35 minutes. Does that sound good?
Okay.
Well, good.
I covered quite in depth the internal marketing and how that relates to the upgrade and to the new student, and we were just getting into a little bit more of the external marketing. So sure. And you know, there is some terminology that around the industry has been misused, and you know, sometimes we have language that we used to use that other people have borrowed or stolen and misused. And one of those, I think, is the word upgrade. A lot of times, if you've heard the chatter among the bozo explosion, you get the wrong idea about what that is all about. And what we want to be doing is helping people set the goal, commit to black belt, commit to long-term involvement. And then it's fine to have a more robust program that is much higher level of developmental skills. Now, what tends to happen is those who aren't very good at this tend to make it about, you also get to learn, not only get to learn Taekwondo, but you get to learn weapons for an extra $20 a month, or you get to be on the demo team or something like that. And that's not terribly sophisticated, and that's not at all what we're talking about. What we're talking about is having a much more robust, oftentimes we call it leadership program, but when we call it a leadership program, we're truly teaching leadership development skills, not just some additional piece of athletic skills. Does that make sense? So I did want to address that. And Master Smith, you guys have talked about internal referrals then? Yeah.
Okay. So I won't address that at all. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. There is an interesting dichotomy where it seems like the traditional schools think that all of their traffic should come from referrals, and you should certainly have as much traffic as you can come from referrals, and where MMA schools think that all their traffic should come from Google. And I don't know why there's that that mindset, but what we focus on, and I freely admit that I stole this from a marketing guy by the name of Jay Abraham, who I talked to last month fairly extensively, but his terminology was you want to create a marketing Parthenon. So if you think of the Parthenon in Greece, what is it? It's a whole bunch of different pillars, right? And what we want to do is develop a ton of different ways, a ton of different pillars of bringing new students in. And one of that would be family add-ons, and another one would be internal referral systems like birthday parties, pizza parties and stuff. Another one would be having family events and family activities and guest passes. And then that's just the chunk that's internal. Then we want to have external, let's say Google. So we're doing pay-per-click, and SEO is showing up on the Google local searches. For those of you who have been around a while, all Google is the modern version of the Yellow Pages. The good thing about the Yellow Pages was it was easy. You design an ad, you give it to them, you don't have to worry about it again for a year. The bad thing was you pay them $3,000 or $4,000 a month for the ad, whether it's working or not. The good thing about Google is you're only paying for results. The bad thing about Google is it's a reactive media. In other words, it's only as good as what Google calls click inventory. What in the Yellow Pages in the analog era was how many people opened the Yellow Page book looking for a martial arts school in that period of time. Does that make sense? Over the years, what you'll hear from myself and Master Smith is 20 years ago, we loved and hated the Yellow Pages because you have no control over whether you're going to get traffic that month or not. And now we both love and hate Google. Same reason. It's the one area that we do marketing that's completely reactive, where you're waiting for other people to go searching, and then you're showing up for them when they go search. Does that make sense? So if you do all of your marketing via trying to show up in pay-per-click, SEO, and Google Local, you're completely just waiting around for external forces to push people to come and contact you. Does that make sense? On the other hand, the good thing about Google is if they go search for, martial arts lessons or MMA school or kids karate lessons, Toronto, Ontario, or Niagara, Ontario, whatever, what they're going to be is they're a buyer. They're actively looking to make a decision to enroll, so therefore you want to be there. Now, what I hear is a lot of times when I say things like the vast majority of students never shop for price, is the system working okay there, Master Smith? I see in you and Rob working on technology, and I know that leaving the technology to you is a fool's errand. I'm not sure about Rob.
Let me check the battery, okay? He thought the battery light was coming on.
It was my fault.
Oh, it's good. We're 77%.
Okay.
Plenty.
There are these things called electric plugs. It has this little Thunderbolt port, and you plug it into the wall.
Technology. Okay, we're good.
You might get the idea I'm the technology guy. He's not.
My fault.
I have the distinction of writing the first book on how to market a martial arts school, the only one that I know of actually, on how to market the martial arts on the internet that I wrote in the year 2000, so 17 years ago. And the primary thing that we were focused on search was on Alta Vista. Anybody remember Alta Vista? And GoTo, which was the progenitor for Overture, which was the progenitor for Google. Yahoo bought GoTo, which they turned it into Overture. and then Google stole the idea from Yahoo without paying for it, and created the same model. But anyway, so on building that Parthenon, what we're always looking to do is be really good online with Google. And when I say Google, there's also Yahoo and there's also Bing, but the 800-pound gorilla is Google, right? I mean, that's 80% of the search traffic. And then be really good online with social media. With social media, the 800-pound gorilla is Facebook. And what I think is a misnomer on social media is that people treat social media for their business the same way they treat social media personally. They think that they can go in and post some pictures and post a little video of what they're doing in class, and and make some nice comments, and post, we do birthday parties, or we have a special offer this month, or something like that, and that they're going to get a lot of traffic from that. Well, let me cue you in. Both Google and Facebook are not in this for charity. Google and Facebook are two of the most profitable countries or companies in the history of the world. And part of what happens with Facebook is the stuff you share with your friends on social media, you're sharing it for free, you're not paying them. But on a business, it really is, the way to think about Facebook is it's very much like a highly targeted print magazine that you can then put an ad in front of people at the right place and the right time. That's the way to think best about Facebook. Is it's a paid advertising medium that you can target your audience really well by geography and by income and by career, by home ownership, etc. The amount of data that Facebook has in the US and in Canada, all over the world, but certainly in North America, the amount of data that Facebook has about you is scary. As an advertiser, that means that you can very clearly define who it is you're targeting, and they'll go find them. And what happens with Facebook is their algorithm behind the scenes is, even once you've targeted, what they start figuring out is how many people are clicking and how many people are opting in. If you tell them what your goal is to at least get them to opt in, then they go find more people like that, and their algorithm keeps looking for it, because guess what? They're getting paid on transactions. They're not getting paid on placement, right? Again, the bad thing about newspaper and magazine advertisement is if you bought a full page and nobody called, you paid the same amount as if you bought a full page and 100 people called, right? So if you managed to find a place where 100 people called, it was a bargain. But if you, most cases, you are placing an ad and getting very little traffic. Online, you don't have that same problem. Online, what you're doing is you're paying for results. You're not paying for just a placement. The bad thing is oftentimes what we're trying to do is pay for the wrong results. We don't want to pay for exposure. I don't care about that. I don't want to pay for clicks. I don't care about that. Really, what I want is new students. In Facebook, I can pay them for people who completed the form, who was an opt-in, right? So I want to be paying for people who are truly interested, complete the form, that I'm likely to get a follow-up. And in an area like Facebook, probably our best case example right now on Facebook is an adult MMA school. In July, and I don't know about the August numbers, at least that I remember, but July, I know that he did 28 new enrollments from Facebook out of 45 enrollments in July. And most of the difference between the 28 and the 45, again, for an adult-oriented MMA school, most of the difference was from Google. So in this case, he did almost all of his enrollments from online activities, but 28 of them were from Facebook. Now the 28 that and this is an outlier, this is the best case scenario, it's not the norm, okay? So I'm not representing it as the norm. But in this case, he was paying $150 approximately per enrollment that he got from Facebook. Notice I didn't say, oh, he posted a bunch of stuff and he hosted a little TV show and he did some cool memes that got viral. None of that happened, nor does that stuff usually work. The ones that we see publicly in the media or that we notice are the far-reaching outliers. They're not the norm, right? Don't even try to think that that's going to work for you. In fact, most of the viral marketing stuff online, the problem is it misses. All you care about is maybe a 3-mile radius, right? I mean, if you're in Niagara, it's a bigger radius, and if you're in the middle of Toronto, it's a smaller radius, right? I mean, we have schools in Manhattan, and we're only worrying about like a 5-block radius in Manhattan, for goodness sake. But really, the problem with all that stuff is you're working on a pretty tight geography, because people aren't going to come from, you know, if they see your viral video from Pakistan, there's not like they're going to commute by Learjet twice a week, right? So with Facebook, it's a paid advertising media where we can pay between $150 and $300 to get in a new enrollment who we want to be worth $5,000 to $7,000 lifetime value, and who we want to pay $400 or $500 or more initially to enroll, so that we're liquidating the cost of the advertising the minute they enroll. That was a mouthful, but did everybody follow what I just said? Okay, so you know, let's say pillar number 1 is all those things that we can do internal. Pillar number 2 is if somebody goes out looking, opens the Yellow Pages, Googles you, that you show up for them. You've got to be in 3 places there. You've got to be the Google Plus, Google Local stuff positioned well. You've got to be good on SEO, and you've got to be buying clicks, right? And then Facebook, and it's all fine to be posting stuff and all that stuff. Most of the stuff you post, unless you pay for it, hardly anybody ever sees it. The whole thing in Facebook is everybody was in the mode of working to get likes. Likes means nothing. I was hearing probably the most sophisticated internet marketing guru around, and he was saying the you know, the amortized value of a like is 0, right? That's not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is get your ad repetitiously shown to the person who looks, acts, and feels emotionally, psychographically, demographically like the student that you have, and certainly like the student that you want, who's going to take action. That's what you want, and we have to pay for getting that message to that person and moving them through the process. Does that make sense to everybody? And it's a fairly sophisticated process. We have to have a landing page that looks like what the ad was. We've got to have an opt-in process that then encourages them to contact us quickly to make an appointment. We've got to have a follow-up sequence, etc. The other thing I might take a note at is the bozo explosion in the industry, probably caught up to the email thing about 10 years too late, is write this down because it's important for you to anchor in. Email is dying a slow and painful death, okay? It's not that email doesn't work, but the stat in North America is, and this is Canada, US, the average person gets 4 pieces of direct mail in their mailbox per day. The average person gets over 150 emails per day. Email has a problem with deliverability. Email has a problem with open rates, and email has a problem of transients. In other words, if I have this fire hose of stuff coming in my email box, what doesn't happen is somebody opens your email, goes, wow, that's a great idea, pulls it up, prints it, posts it on their refrigerator, and makes a note to call you. That doesn't happen. They go, oh, that's a great idea. Maybe they click a link. Maybe they look at something. They've got 10 windows open on their desktop. Sometimes the TV going on and the kids asking them for something. Then they forget about it and it goes away, right? So what you have to realize on marketing right now is our follow-up mechanisms include pick up the phone and call them, text them. Texting has nearly 100% open rate, much higher response rate than email. Put a big package in the mail, a small package in the mail, a postcard in the mail, and email them. And we can then, once they've shown an interest, and this is called retargeting, is we can retarget in at least two different ways. One way we can retarget is we put a little HTML code on your website, landing page, whatever. And then when they land on your website, we can show them ads in Facebook and their related properties, and we can show them ads in Google and their related properties, right? That's a very important component, because when you're doing online marketing, you don't keep their attention very long. And in many times, even though they're interested, they go away quickly, and we want to stay in front of them. Does that make sense? The other way you can retarget is we can take an email list or a list of phone numbers of people who we have interacted with at a movie theater, or interacted with at a carnival, or who came in for a birthday party, whatever the case may be, and we can upload that list to Google and Facebook, and now we can keep showing ads to them. Does that make sense? And see, a very important marketing principle, one is that idea of the Parthenon, to have a bunch of stuff going on. The other important principle is, just because they saw an ad today, regardless of whether they enrolled or not, that doesn't mean they're not interested, right? And if they came into your school and didn't enroll today, that also doesn't mean they're not interested. People's lives are busy. There was, if you've ever seen the show Mad Men, it was in part based upon Ogilvy. And Ogilvy, who was one of the first great direct response advertising agencies, his line was, "It's a moving parade of humanity." What he meant by that was not that your entire neighborhood changes over frequently. What he meant is people are going through a divorce, and when that's settled down, they're interested. People have grandmother in the hospital, and when she recovers, they're interested. Folks go through peaks and valleys of finances. They just had to put a new transmission in the car, and they're not ready to pay for something this month, but 2 months from now, you see what I'm saying? Their mental state, their time, their schedule changes week by week, month by month. So somebody may look at your ad, not respond in September, but be ready to come to you in July or in January. What do most of us do? We show it to them, and then we say, oh, they're not interested. They come into a birthday party. They come into a buddy event. They come in and take an intro and then enroll. And we say to ourselves, well, they're just not interested in doing this. It's the wrong thing to say to ourselves. What we have to say is, maybe this just wasn't the right time financially or schedule. So we want to stay in front of them forever. How can we stay in front of them? We can stay in front of them on Facebook and their related properties, on Google and their related properties. We can stay in front of them by emailing them forever and repetitiously. We can stay in front of them by direct mailing to them forever and repetitiously. We can stay in front of them by periodically sending text messages that we have permission for. We can stay in front of them by picking up the phone and calling them, inviting them to special events, special activities, special opportunities. Does that make sense? And by the way, on all of this electronic media, whether it's email or text, and again, in the United States, we first started restricting what we could do on a lot of this stuff, and then Canada was wild, wild west, and then just went to the other extreme. Most of it is about relationship and permission. If somebody wants you to send them a text or email, if somebody has given permission for that, you don't have problems. However, if it's just you went and bought a list of phone numbers, and then in a cold way you put robocalling on them and text messaging on them, you're going to have legal problems that are going to multiply. Does that make sense? So all of this is about getting permission, having them know that you're going to use that mechanism, having them be happy about it, and then in most cases having an opportunity electronically for them to opt out, whether it's a text messaging or email, having them have the ability to say, hey, I don't want to keep receiving this. Is that making sense? I have heard people in Canada recently who are freaked out about the new regulations, and you're right. You know, your politicians are trying to shut down businesses by making it difficult to market, as have ours. However, as long as the person wants to receive educational information and contact information, and as long as you do it appropriately, and as long as they can choose to not receive it, then you're not going to have problems. Does that make sense? So it's mostly about permission and relationship. So a lot of information there so far. Questions about that? Is that making sense? So you start developing the Parthenon. You have internal referral, family add-ons. You have being found in Google. You have using Facebook effectively and appropriately. The next thing I would say, and I think you talked about that a little bit already, Master Smith, is we're having really good results with community outreach, whether it be in the kids market working directly with public and private elementary schools, or whether it be movie theaters, live events, other promotional activities. We're having really good success with stuff like that. You guys talked about that a little bit, didn't you?
Well, no, I didn't do the, we did the internal marketing, we didn't do the external, and I thought you might want to cover the school programs.
Sure, sure. Well, you know, in the limited time that we have today, and what we want to do is make sure we have a chance to talk individually with everybody. And what we're going to do is give you some very specific feedback on ways that you can modify and tune based upon your community, your structure, your format, on what you can do to make some dramatic improvements right away. And clearly, you know, another thing is, you know, our vested self-interest is we're looking for more people who are like Rob, who are a good fit for our program, who we'd like to work with, who we can get a 10 to 1, 20 to 1, 30 to 1 return on investment. And if when we talk, if you're a good fit, which we have a pretty stringent criteria anymore of who we're willing to work with on an ongoing basis. And I got to tell you, the first of it is we don't even want to talk to anybody that we're not going to get at least a 10 to 1 return on any investment they put out. But when we talk individually, we're going to give you some real meat and some real individual focused information about how you can go in and improve your school, regardless about whether we, you know, work together from then on or not. But the second piece of it, I'm violating our own rule. I've got my cell phone ringing on the desk and doesn't seem to want to turn off. But the other thing is, if you're a good fit and we can get you to, like I mentioned with the one school, if we can get you from $45,000 a month gross to $45,000 a month net, we enjoy doing that. And frankly, we enjoyed getting paid for doing that. And so, you know, we'll talk about what that process is. And if not, then we just had a chance to give you some feedback on how to grow your school. But go into those other couple of pieces, Master Smith, quickly before I've chewed up too much time. What again I find is I hear a lot of times school owners, and I don't care whether it's in Ontario or whether it's in California, wherever it might be, school owners say, in the kids market, I can't work with our public schools because they won't allow businesses to come in for whatever, you know, for this reason, right? And in every case, that's always a false statement. What that is occasionally is it's taking the wrong approach, or the wrong approach with the wrong person, or going through the wrong mechanism, right? Is we have never found in any situation, in any area, that there's not an awful lot of things in the kids market that we can do with private and public elementary schools. In the adult market, the comparable is you want to think about what other businesses and organizations have my target students, right? Number one. And then you want to be thinking about what is my net mechanism that I can go in and introduce what I'm doing into those groups of people in such a way that is going to be in their best interest and is going to get me the results I'm looking for. Does that make sense? So in the adult market, I guess what I was going to say is the comparable to working with an elementary school is going in and working with 300 employees that work at the corporate headquarters of whatever company is there. Or it's going in and working with like Master Smith, your injury was you're out in the, the 20-year-olds softball league, being the pitcher. There's softball leagues, there's other sports leagues, there's major employers. And then in addition to that, there's an awful lot of businesses that are very comparable, not in what they do, but who they attract. Would you agree with that? In the kids market, there's everything from toy stores to Chuck E. Cheese or comparables that draw predominantly kids or do birthday parties. So we can go out and work with those organizations so that we're helping them and they're helping us and we're working cooperatively. Does that make sense to everybody? So one thing that we do in the elementary schools, just to give you an example, is, with the bozo explosion, an idea that I started doing in the 80s ended up being named School Talks by somebody else who heard the idea but didn't understand it. And so what they'll teach is go into Mrs. Jones's elementary school, go into the second grade class, go teach a little class at 10:15, and then give them all a pass and say you can come down on Saturday for a special class. It's not that it doesn't work a little bit, it's just that it doesn't work very well. Does that make sense? Well, we have changed, well, not changed that, but what the idea was originally that person didn't understand is that 100% of what makes it work, or at least 90% of what makes it work, is having the ability to follow up with those people by direct mail, by telephone, and now by email, one thing or another. And so what we do instead is we use permission slips for the parents to give permission for the child to participate. We ask them whether they're interested in, we'll say all the kids participate today are going to receive 2 free weeks of lessons in a free uniform. If you'd like us to contact you to schedule the first free class, check yes. And if not, check no. And then everybody who checks yes, we'll contact, right? So my idea in the 80s and beyond was we'd go into an elementary school with 500 kids. We'd get 400 permission slips. We'd get 200 who checked yes. And now we've got 200 people who've had some exposure who have given permission for us to contact them. Does that make sense? So that's just one of many ways that we can go into an elementary school and have some good results. But it's a lot different than what the School Talks thing is. Because School Talks is, I go, do a class for Mrs. Jones's elementary class of 30 kids, have no ability to follow up, give them a pass, and then one of the 30 shows up on Saturday. See, that's not worthwhile in most cases as compared to what the idea really is. Does that make sense, Master Smith?
Yep.
And we're going to run out of time, but what I will say is many times the schools that maybe they have 300 students or 200 students, but we'll find that in addition to being able to show them some additional ways to find students, usually they're doing an awful lot of things pretty inefficiently, right? So they're doing internal events, but they're getting a handful of students out of it rather than a flood of students. They're doing maybe some external community events, whether it's live events and setting up a booth or whether it's something like the elementary school. But what they're getting is they're getting limited traffic. And we see that a lot. Rob will tell you we have a little discussion forum only for our members, and we talk to them like this more interactively every week. But, we were, Rob, what was it, a couple days ago, one of the members posted, you know, we have this big community fair we go to every year. Last year we got 7 intros and 2 students from it. This year we got 150 appointments, 100 intros, and 40 students from it. Big difference, right? And what happens is it's not that they spent any less or more time out there at that fair. It's their strategy was flawed, and then we teach them the missing components to turn that into students. Rob, is that a fair way to say it?
100%.
Yeah, and we see examples of that every day. Just phenomenal. But Master Smith, why don't since I've chewed up a lot of the time here, I want to get them off the virtual world. But I do want to remind everybody of Martial Arts Wealth /free book, and also remind you guys of Martial Arts Wealth /mastermind. So those are your assignment over the weekend. There's, what is it, Bob? About 4 hours worth of video content between those 2 sites?
Between the 2, yes, sir.
Yeah, so it's about
Roughly.
4 hours. And there's some really good material. There's a video with me, there's a video with myself and Master Smith, and there's a video with Lee Miltier. So your assignment over the weekend is to go through those and to also download those 2 books. Master Smith, why don't we go ahead and make sure, since we have Bob here and me here, let's go ahead and make sure we have those follow-up appointments for next week, and then I'll let you get back to it or do any Q&A at all as well.